Okay, so I've got 50 submarines operating in the South China Sea. I've got a bunch of US planes queued up to attack the South China Sea. Let's see just how good those US planes are. Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Counterfactual Gaming, the gaming channel where if there's something historical, we don't do it. Now I'm here today using naval bombers based all the way in Manila to bomb the Japanese home islands in order to prove a point about aircraft, specifically naval bombers. And I'm here today to explore a question, whether or not bigger is better when it comes to land-based naval bombers. But before we get into that, I just want to remind everyone that if you like what you see here, go ahead and put a like on a video and drop a sub on the channel so you can get notified about more content that I release. And if you have any questions about how I'm able to actually get naval bombers with this kind of range, or if you just have a complaint about the number of ships I'm sinking at Anchor and Hiroshima, drop a comment down below and I'll be sure to get to it and talk to you about that. But today, let's talk about land-based naval bombers. Does size really matter? Now, when we're going to talk about land-based naval bombers, I'm going to talk about them today in the context of the Pacific theater, okay? Most of what I'm going to say will also have some application in the Atlantic, in particular when we get to the part of the video where I just obliterate dozens and dozens of subs in a 72-hour period. We're focusing on the Pacific today because range matters in the Pacific. These air regions are gigantic. If you compare that to air regions over here in, say, Europe, you don't need 5,000 kilometers of range to dominate air in Europe. This isn't a problem. It's when we get out over here into the Pacific that range really starts to matter. And that's when medium airframes and large airframes start to come into their own. Just to demonstrate this, 3 different kinds of naval attack aircraft here in the Philippines. I've got Mariners, which are light airframes. I've got the not so big PBY, which is a medium airframe. And I've got the Mega PBY, which is based on a large airframe. Now, to give you an idea of how big these air regions are, this light airframe Mariner is just a torpedo, a single engine, and range slapped on it. That's it. And it has the Grumman designer. We'll talk about Grumman and the other designers in just a second. But it's got Grumman attached to it. It has a range of 1690, which seems really good. But if we select the Mariner I've got based in the Philippines, look at the range circle for a second. That's a nice range circle, but do you notice something? Because of airfield placement, the Mariners do not get 100% mission efficiency in any of these sea regions. Not the Philippine Sea, not the East China Sea, not the South China Sea, not even down here. They get most of this sea, but they can't even get that. So when we're talking about large sea zones in the Pacific, we have both large sea zones, but we also have what can only be described as suboptimal airfield placement, making it hard for planes to function without a ton of range. Now, if we grab, say, the not-so-big PBYs here, we take a look at the stats on it. The not-so-big PBY has a range of 2420. And if we look at the not-so-big PBY's range band, we can see that, it has a range band that lets it cover this, most of this, almost all of this, and a good chunk of like the Java Sea and other stuff over here. That's much better range performance. And if we take a look at the Mega PBY, this is based off a large airframe, we can have a range of 4,600 kilometers, and the Mega PBY has a range band. I gotta zoom way out to show you what that range band looks like. It can reach Australia, it can reach Manchukuo, the Japanese home islands, and India from Manila. Which means that it can also hit anything in this sea zone, this sea zone, this sea zone, this sea zone, here. It can start getting some mission efficiency even in the Bay of Bengal. This is why range matters in the Pacific, because if you can put your land-based air in starting airfields and hit enemy territory from the beginning of the game, you have a distinct advantage. So if range is a consideration when we're doing air operations in the Pacific, it means we want to look at two different ways of building aircraft. We look at either medium planes or we look at heavy, large airframes. Now, I'm doing this from the perspective of the US. Most of what I'm going to say here will also apply to Japan, because both the US and the Japan have a range designer for medium airframes. Okay, for the US, it's NAA. For Japan, it's the Aichi designer that they have to unlock via focus. But that puts Japan a little bit behind the US, but there's no reason Japan cannot also create ridiculously long-range aircraft. But we're going to use the US as our example here just to make things simple. Those of you who like Japan should note that a plane with this kind of range could reach Pearl Harbor from Japan's starting islands in the Pacific. Just sort of put that into your brain while we're having this discussion. When we're talking about building land-based naval bombers, I've mentioned that we have the range designer here for the medium airframe, and it has a whole bunch of bonuses, but you're probably thinking to yourself, why aren't you using the naval aviation designer? Well, that's because the game won't let me use the naval aviation designer. You notice that I'm clicking on this medium airframe here, and I've only got two choices, Lockheed or North American Aviation. It's the same for the large airframe. If I go here, my only option is Boeing. What I can't do is do what I've done with the Mariner, which is put Grumman on it. You will notice that Grumman is the naval aircraft designer. And Grumman has some interesting bonuses, but for land-based aircraft, they don't provide quite the same bonuses that they would for carrier-based aircraft, and their bonuses don't really jack naval attack up, nor do they provide a whole lot of range. Naval aircraft designers tend to be better for making carrier planes that can shoot down other carrier planes. I'm bringing this up, though, because if you were thinking to yourself, I want to build really good naval bombers, I want to use the naval aircraft designer, just get that out of your head. We're not even looking for the word naval when we're talking about MIOs. Instead, we want MIOs that boost range, like this one does, and we want MIOs like this one that also boost range. Now, Boeing also boosts naval attack, but that 5% isn't super important. I mean, it's nice to have, don't get me wrong, but it's not super important. You'll also notice that Boeing has some detection upgrades. Those are also nice to have, but as we're going to see in a moment, detection is not why we're applying these MIOs. Okay, so we want to apply fancy MIOs to our planes in the Pacific as the US or Japan. But which is going to be more efficient? Now, there's one other thing I want to mention before I start talking about bigger aircraft. The light airframe aircraft that I did some early testing with, because of the mission efficiency problems a plane like this faces in large air regions, it's not very cost effective compared to the other two planes we're going to be looking at. That doesn't make this plane useless, and if you were thinking of doing naval strikes anywhere outside the Pacific or the Indian Ocean, a plane like this might do you really well, especially if you're building lots of other light aircraft. But when we're working in the Pacific, we really want that mission efficiency jacked up. So all I'm going to say is this is not going to be as efficient as the other two planes we're going to be looking at. Let's look at our other two planes. Now, I tried a bunch of designs with both the medium and the large 1940 airframes to see what would make the best land-based naval bomber. And I've come up with two different designs that are comparable, but they do slightly different things. But I need to explain something before we talk about this, what looks like a weird module configuration on these planes. First, ranges got nerfed in Arms Against Tyranny and in the patch that was released a few weeks after Arms Against Tyranny was released. That nerf to range impacted a lot of mechanics but it also impacted what modules you can even put on airplanes while still having enough weight to do things. Second, we want to sort of keep in mind that this is primarily directed at the AI, not necessarily a human opponent. Not that these planes would necessarily be terrible against a human opponent, but as you're going to see in a minute, I'm going to use some modules to make them more efficient at blowing up ships that will also make them less efficient if the enemy actually puts up significant air resistance. And the AI, while it will put planes in the sky, in the Pacific the AI is really bad at using long-range aircraft, so they're going to always have really terrible mission efficiency. You can get away with using a non-strategic materials module on your planes to make them cheaper and to cut that aluminum cost down. Something you would not be able to do in a multiplayer environment, where multiplayer, and if your opponent knows, oh, I need a 2,000 kilometer range to adequately defend my airspace, and then they will just do that. So, let's look at the medium airframe I came up with. Now, remember something about tactical bombers. We talked about this in the CAS versus TAC video I did just recently. The first module slot on a medium airframe has to be fighter weapons or tactical bomber weapons. It cannot be a torpedo. So you have to decide right up front what to put in that module. The temptation a lot of players have is to put this fat module in the first slot. After all, it does provide port strike capability. However, I'm going to tell you not to do that. Here's why. You can see that I currently have a valid design in use. But if I swap to the medium bomb bay, you'll notice that I don't have enough thrust anymore. Well, why don't I have sufficient thrust? Well, it's because this module weighs a whole bunch more than the LMGs I put up there, and it makes the rest of this design illegal. We don't want that. So what we're going to do is we're going to put the tiniest LMGs in the first module, which technically makes this a heavy fighter. We're not going to use it as a heavy fighter. The game thinks it's a heavy fighter. It's not. This is our naval bomber. And we're going to put two of the improved Tier 2 torpedoes on it. I would mount a third one, but as you can see here, the game will not let me do that. Medium airframes can only mount 2 torpedoes. We're going to do the 2-engine format with Tier 3 engines. We're going to do non-strategic materials usage. We're going to add a range module, and in a controversial decision, I'm going to add radio navigation and air-to-ground radar. This might seem silly because this plane is not going to be strategically bombing. Why do I want radio navigation? Well, you see this night penalty over here? Radio navigation, while it does make a plane better at strategic bombing, also cuts the night penalty by 20%. Air-to-ground radar is going to reduce that penalty by a further 30%, giving me a whopping minus 50% to night penalty for these 2 modules. Furthermore, air-to-ground radar does provide additional surface and sub-detection if that interests you at all. We could put more fuel on here, but if we did that, we'd have to scrounge up some extra engines, making the plane more expensive. And as we're going to find out, we don't want to make the plane too expensive. Also, slapping on another fuel tank only takes the range to 2,900. I'm not sure it's worth it for this airframe to do that. Okay, so this is our medium airframe, not so big PB-1. When I was originally testing this, I did try flying boat for both, but I realized that the flying boat module wasn't helping them actually blow up ships and was adding 4 to the production cost of the plane. So it's like, no, we're going to ditch that, and we're just going to use these other modules down here. When we slap North American on here, we have a massive increase in range, and we have a plane that is 37.5 weight out of 38 thrust. Cost 52.26. Thanks to the non-strategic materials usage module, this plane only cost me 2 aluminum and 1 rubber. When we go to the Mega PBY on the large airframe, that same non-strategic materials usage module drags the aluminum cost down to 1, which is great because these medium and large airframes do require a ton of aluminum. And even the US has a finite amount of aluminum it can tap. So we look at our Mega PBY here. This is a large airframe that uses only torpedo modules because the game will let me put a torpedo module in the first slot. So this makes it a naval patrol bomber. the game will let me mount 3 improved torpedoes on there, so that's exactly what we do. We're using a 4-engine configuration, non-strategic materials usage, of course. We can put 2 fuel tanks on here, and we add the electronics suite so that when we're on naval strike, we've got the same penalty reduction to night attack that the not-so-big PBY does. This plane has massive naval attack. It has a massive naval attack. It also has pretty good, decent naval targeting, and it has that whopping 4,600 kilometer range. It also costs almost 100 per plane. This is a ridiculously expensive aircraft. You also need to know something else about these large airframe patrol aircraft. They don't come in air wings of 100. They come in air wings of 10. Okay? There are complicated reasons why Paradox did that, and I don't fully understand all of them. But what that means is when we are planning our tests and when we were planning on using these planes, we need to think, oh, okay, the medium airframes are in groups of 100, large airframes are in groups of 10. If we compare the cost of these two planes, and if we compare their stats on naval strike, it would look like the medium airframe gives you more naval attack per cost than the Mega PBY, which should make the medium airframe more efficient. But the large airframe has the ridiculous range, so it should be able to get targets farther away, which has its own utility in the Pacific. But when we're talking about bombing ships, we have to keep in mind that AA guns are going to kill planes. And I don't mean a few planes. AA guns will kill a significant number of planes. And the AA guns don't care how expensive your plane is. Okay? They don't care. Your plane can cost 3 or 300, and from the AA guns perspective, the only thing they care about is their air attack, and they care about the agility of the plane doing a naval strike, and that's it. That's the only thing they care about. And it's worth pointing out that the Mega PBY, see this plane, the not-so-big PBY, has an agility of 11.8, which is terrible agility, but it is better than the 1 agility of the Mega PBY. If we go to the wiki, we can see that the wiki tells us agility matters when calculating naval AA gun effectiveness against naval bombers. So if we look at the raw stats, it looks like the medium airframe should be more efficient at killing enemy ships than the large airframe, unless we are trying to hit targets that are too far away for even the medium airframes to hit. But when we look at our tests, we're going to see something much more complicated than that. There's also something we have to talk about regarding bombing ships, and that's detection. Okay? You'll notice that here I have 1,500 medium fighters on air superiority over the South China Sea. This doesn't matter in terms of blowing up ships, because fighters don't blow up ships. They're only on air superiority. But detection matters. And if you try to bomb enemy ships in an area where you don't have radar, you don't have air superiority, you're gonna not get any hits, or you'll get like 1 hit every week and it won't do a lot of damage. So to make these tests more effective and to demonstrate why you need planes on air superiority in the first dang place, we're gonna have, for these tests, we're gonna have a lot of medium airframes on air superiority over the South China Sea, providing detection so that our naval bombers can always find the Japanese ships and bomb them. So how are we going to test the effectiveness of these planes? Well, the test I've designed involves a couple of factors. One, we're going to take this starting fleet of the Imperial Japanese Navy, put it under Yamamoto, although that probably won't matter. And with these starting Japanese ships, we're going to have 4 carriers, 4 battleships, 3 battle cruisers, 10 heavy cruisers, and a bunch of screens and submarines in it. Now, we're not going to engage this with U.S. naval assets at all. What I'm going to do is park this off the coast of Formosa, order it to never repair, so it will just stay there and get bombed. And then we're going to fling planes at it for a month and see whether the medium airframes or the large airframes destroy more ships. Now, for the US side, we're going to do some IC normalized tests to see which plane is more effective. For the medium airframes, we're going to deploy 1,000 of them to Manila. We will, of course, use the instant construction sheet to build the requisite airfields. And when we test the large airframes, we will use 500 of them. Of course, they will be broken up into 10 aircraft wings because that's how the large airframes function. And we're going to have the rest of the airspace on those airfields covered by heavy fighters set to air superiority. So we're going to put either 1,000 medium airframe navs or 500 large airframe navs over the South China Sea with enough heavy fighters in the area to provide adequate detection. Now again, I want to emphasize here that even though the bombers have radar and radio navigation, because of how detection works, we need the air superiority coverage from the heavy fighters to provide sufficient detection so they can actually find the fleet. Remember, I can't build radar in the Philippines because Philippines don't have radar tech. And in the course of a normal game, even if the US has level 6 radar technology, if the Philippines only have level 1 radar technology, that's all you're going to be able to build. So I can build airfields, I can station aircraft there, but I can't just rely on land-based radar to do that. Now I've put up a screenshot of my run with the medium airframes. We're going to do them first. And I want us to notice a couple of things about using land-based naval bombers. First of all, it took 30 days, but they sank 3 of the 4 carriers in the fleet. Hosho wasn't sunk, but she's at 65% damage. We also claimed a sub. The cost for this was 68 medium airframe navs. Now, you'll notice that the carrier fleet does have its own aircraft, and the carrier-based aircraft are not having an impact on this battle. And that's because there's air superiority in place, but also because they don't really respond to land-based naval strikes. If you take a look on the right side, you're going to see it's ships shooting down the planes. Now, this took 30 days to accomplish. That doesn't seem like a lot. But in terms of math, the medium airframe navs killed 23,577 production cost in ships and only lost 3,549 cost of airplanes. Now, that's dead ships. We're not even counting all of the damaged ships. So that's pretty good. I mean, that's not bad. What about the heavy airframes? If we look at the heavy airframes, we'll notice that the heavy airframes claimed all 4 carriers dead, killed 2 subs, and you'll see that they did a significant amount of damage to all the other ships in the fleet, significantly hurting some of the battleships. Now, 40 of those naval bombers were lost. Now, these are much more expensive naval bombers than the medium airframe. So while we lost $35.49 in production cost of medium airframes, we lost $39.76 in production cost of large airframes. But what did we kill? Well, we killed 28,197 worth of ships, not counting all the extra damage done to ships that can be repaired. It looks like the medium navs won this one until we factor in the ratio of production loss versus production killed. And when we factor in those ratios, we realize that the medium navs killed 6.64 times as much production cost as they lost. The large airframes killed 7.09 as much production cost as they lost. So yes, at starting game technologies, facing the starting navy of the IJN, bigger plane wins hands down. You got to be able to produce those planes, but again, like if you know that you can just obliterate the Japanese fleet, you can just build and spam planes. Keep in mind, both Japan and the US, in a historical scenario, have until 1941 to get all their ducks in a row. So it should be possible to get enough of these planes in action to achieve these kinds of results. However, clever players are already saying to themselves, but counterfactual gaming, the starting Japanese Navy has absolute garbage for AA, and you are 100% right. In fact, all of the starting navies have kind of bad AA in 1936. Blowing up a bunch of 1936 ships, while fun and effective, let me emphasize that, effective, isn't the same as fighting against more technologically advanced warships. So I decided to do a second test. I repeated those tests that I just showed you a number of times, and there was some RNG fluctuation in them, but the overall result was pretty consistent. The bigger plane was slightly better, but both are very cost-effective at killing ships. Why don't we try something different, though? What if we instead had super heavy battleships designed with some of the best technology we can get? This is a Yamato with an air attack of 17. This Yamato includes several dual-purpose secondary batteries. It's got radar, which provides an anti-air bonus. It's got a fire control system, which provides an AA bonus. It's got a Tier 3 AA gun system, which provides a nice flat rate to AA. And it still has plenty of heavy batteries, so it could actually blow up opposing ships. This is a super heavy battleship that knows it's going to be bombed. So I put 4 of these in a fleet, and then I screened 4 of these super heavy battleships with Tier 3 cruisers designed like this. We have dual-purpose secondary, radar, fire control, AA gun. We have some nice light cruiser guns here, but I put on a bunch of DP secondaries to give this cruiser an air attack of 25. Now, most players are probably looking at this ship and thinking to themselves, that's not a very optimized ship. You probably want more light attack and less air attack. But this ship is clearly designed to screen other ships and provide some AA assistance. If a nav targets this ship instead of one of the battleships, it's gonna get shredded by the AA guns. And I did the same thing, where I parked them right off the coast of Formosa, and I ran some naval bombings against them over the course of a month. So let's test super navs first. I want you to watch this live because it looks scary as we watch it live. But when we run the numbers, it's going to have a surprising result. Okay, so I've got my planes flying over the South China Sea. I've parked the Japanese Yamatos off the coast of Formosa, and let's go. Okay, we can see the mega PBYs are getting shredded as they bomb ships. Uh-oh. And after 30 days, we can see that we've lost 485 mega PBYs, but we sank all of the super heavy battleships. So that's a lot of dead planes to sink a Yamato, but I do want to point out that each of those dead Yamatos cost 24,889 production costs to build. These are not cheap ships. Now, just for comparison, when we were bombing the starting fleet of Japan, the Kaga only costs 89.52. The loss of those carriers, while stinging to Japan, is nothing compared to the loss of 4 of these monstrously expensive ships. How does the cost shake out, though? Well, if we remember, those mega PBYs cost 99.4, so 285 of those being destroyed is 48,209 production cost, but they sank 99,556 worth of ships. That's the 4 super heavy battleships, not counting damaged ships. Roughly totaling to 2.06 in kill ratio in favor of the mega PBY. So even though we lost 485 of these gigantically expensive aircraft, they still killed far more ships in production costs than the planes that we lost. I would consider that efficient, but what about medium airframes? When we run medium airframes, we're going to have 1,000 of them instead of 500 of them, flying from the Philippines with 1,000 heavy fighters to provide the requisite detection. And we're going to do this one live as well, so you can see how scary these numbers look. And of course, the opposition suffered a defeat in this Senate while I'm doing this live. Thanks, Heartsvine. And those are our results. Not as good as the other results, were they? I need to come clean about this particular test before I do the math. I did this test 3 times as many times as any of the other tests I did because for some reason, the medium airframe navs based in Manila had wildly different results compared to any of the other tests I did. I even closed Hearts of Iron 4 and restarted it because I thought it had a weird problem with the random number seed. What you're seeing here is mostly is a middle of the road result, but I've got to be honest with you, I saw one result with only 1 dead super heavy battleship. I saw one with 4 dead super heavy battleships. I saw one with 500 dead planes. I saw one with 700 dead planes. This, though, this 674 versus 3 dead Yamatos happened enough times to make it kind of the middle of the bell curve. So if we calculate those losses, those are 674 planes. That's a total production cost of 35,182. We sank 3 Yamatos, and again, those Yamatos cost 24,889 for a total production cost of 74,667. Does mean, despite the absurd number of aircraft lost, the medium nav certainly came out ahead with a kill ratio of 2.12 in favor of the navs. So the navs were killing 2.12 production costs for every 1 point of production cost spent on aircraft, which technically makes them better than the big PBYs. But 2.06 ratio versus 2.12 is so close together that, given what I've been seeing with RNG in these tests, makes them almost equal mathematically. Now, I do want to talk a little bit about using both of these kinds of planes against submarines. And I showed you at the beginning of the film 50 submarines dying within 72 hours. That was against the large airframe navs. If we tag over to Japan, I want you to see the kind of submarines that they were bombing. Because I didn't use Japan's starting subs. I used 50 of these subs. These are Tier 3 submarines with snorkels and a fully leveled up Sasebo naval yard, which reduces their visibility even further. So, Tier 3 sub already has really solid visibility reduction. Snorkel reduces visibility, and Sasebo is reducing visibility. And it even has the Tier 3 engine, which has even better visibility reduction. These submarines should be very hard to see, but as you saw at the beginning of the video, they got cleared out in 72 hours. I tested it with both the medium airframe and the large airframe. Large airframe, it took 72 hours to kill all 50 subs. Medium airframe, it took 6 to 7 days to kill all 50 subs. I ordered these 50 subs, by the way, under Ozawa to patrol the South China Sea, and I told them not to repair, just like I did with the surface ships. So, in addition to blowing up carriers, super heavy battleships, both kinds of navs that I've been talking about in this video are absolutely deadly against submarines as well. For those playing the US, I would like to point out that using an airfield in Maine, the large airframe aircraft can cover everything from the Caribbean to the Mid-Atlantic Gap to the North Atlantic Ridge and Greenland. With bases in Greenland and Britain, this plane should be able to completely cover any sea zone German subs are typically able to access. So while both airplanes are certainly solid choices, I again think that bigger is better in this case. The Mega PBY should be your aircraft of choice if you're looking to blow up submarines as well. All right, I think that wraps it up. Both airplanes that I've showed you today are perfectly acceptable for sinking enemy ships, but I think bigger is better when we're talking about land-based naval bombers in the Pacific. I hope that you got a lot out of this video, and I really enjoyed making it for you. As we can see here, I'm going to massacre the IJN in the South China Sea while we wrap up our discussion. I'm not sure what I'm planning to do next for a video. I'm still working on testing fighter aircraft. I've almost come to a conclusion about that, but I need to test a few more things. My channel is now officially monetized, so you can become a member of my channel. I'll be posting a video a little bit later this week about that. I kind of soft launched that feature. I didn't want to talk about it directly with my fans until I actually fully understood what was happening with it, because YouTube changed how that worked right at the point where I became monetized. So I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. But regardless of that, it is a gray, miserable day where I live. But it doesn't matter because I, of course, have installed radar on all of my aircraft so I can see in the bad weather. But for you, I hope you're having a pleasant day, and until next time, have fun, and make sure you bomb things adequately in the Pacific.